The I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast is here. Boom, have no fear. The I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast is here on today's brand new banging, museum quality, historic I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast. He's back. The worldwide news correspondent of the I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast, Eli Lake from the Free Press. He's down with the Free Press, is here to talk about his new podcast, Breaking History. We're talking about Trump. We're talking about concerns in the Middle East. We're talking about concerns regarding Trump's deals with Iran. We're talking about the hostage deal in Israel. And we're talking about his new podcast, Breaking History. Miles Jordan, a.k.a. the Bleach Brothers, a.k.a. the Dust Brothers. Start this puppy over to him real nice. Stickity, start this puppy over to him real loud. But most importantly, start this banging I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast off with something real funky. Have no fear, the I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast is here. Higgity, have no fear, the I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast is in the place to be. 1, 2, 3, in the place to be. I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast is here with the officially unofficial world news correspondent of the I Am Rapaport Stereo Podcast for years and years and years, bringing us so much insight.
We're going on a decade. Mike Rap.
We're going on a decade. You hear him, my man, Eli Lake, the great Eli Lake is in the place to be. What a better time, what a more needed time to have Eli Lake back on the podcast. Welcome, my friend, Eli Lake. How are you, my man?
Oh, it's great. And I feel like we've been on a similar political journey because I remember some of our first conversations about Trump. We couldn't believe it. We were turned off. And now look at us 10 years later, and we're like breathing a sigh of relief that that old bag of bones is no longer the president. So it's like...
And also, you could breathe a sigh of relief that that old bag of bones isn't president, but also not bow down and be like some sort of sycophant to Trump. It's like you can be supportive of Trump and be supportive of this new regime and also... hard body karate criticize him, which is the thing that's lost so much right now. But before we get into what I want to ask you, I want to congratulate you on your new podcast, which just launched, Breaking History, which is on the Free Press, your new podcast where you're going to be giving such a important voice. I mean, you're an expert. I think you're fair, you're diligent, you take what you do seriously. But tell me about your new podcast. Tell me about your new podcast, sure. Breaking History.
Okay, so the idea behind it is that every episode, we look at something that's like a current roiling debate, an issue in the news, and then we try to explain it through an episode from something that happened historically. And the first episode is out under Breaking History, although I did about 8 of these very similar format for honestly, but it's about Trump's inauguration and the fact that he represents a populist challenge to the sort of establishment and the elite, which I think is fair to say. And then we look at the first populist president, Andrew Jackson. And there are so many similarities between Trump and Andrew Jackson. Not a perfect parallel, but certainly both of them kind of came to office complaining that the election before had been stolen from them. Jackson believed the 1824 election was stolen because of what he called the corrupt bargain, because it went to the House of Representatives. It was a very weird election. There were 4 people running, ostensibly from the same party, and the Speaker of the House was also a candidate, and he put his votes behind John Quincy Adams, even though Jackson had the most votes. Jackson thought, they stole it from me. He called it the corrupt bargain. And then what did Trump have? He had stopped the steal, which fueled his base. And we interview people in it that are dropped like block quotes in like an audio essay. So one of the people we had was Steve Bannon. Wow. And Steve Bannon is like an expert on Andrew Jackson. He's obviously was like a big strategist for Trump in 2016, 2017. And he also says that, listen, the fact that he says, like, you and I can disagree. I don't think the 2020 election was stolen, but he says the fact that they stole it from us, that was a burning desire in our base. That's one of the things that where we were able to, march forward and win in 2024, which is what happened. And then we look at the fact that, like, populism can be a good thing in America and it can be a bad thing. And it can be a good thing, Mike Rapp, because it's a way to let off steam. We're a country that's founded by...
What does that term mean, populism? Explain that, because it's a term that's thrown around and it's like we know what popular is, but what does that term mean when in regards to politics and party?
Okay, that's a great question. So populism, I think the best way to say it is it's more of a kind of political mood. It's a political grammar. And it basically is anytime you have a political movement that is claiming to represent the people, which can mean a lot of things, against a kind of, nebulous elite. So sometimes you have populist movements that are against the banks. Certainly Andrew Jackson, that was his big issue, was getting rid of the Second American National Bank because he thought that concentrated wealth in the hands of plutocrats. In the case of Trump, it's the deep state or it's the media. It's like this sort of some version of the elite that's screwing over the little guy. And that sentiment is encoded in our country's DNA. That is like the spirit of the Boston Tea Party. That is, you'll appreciate when you listen to the episode. I say, an expression of populism in some ways is Dirk Diggler on the set of a porno in Boogie Nights saying, you're not the fucking king of me. You're not the boss of me. That's populism. It's just this feral defiance.
I got it.
And you get it. It's a spirit. And by the way, populists can be on the left, Bernie Sanders. They can also be on the hard right, like Father Coughlin, who was a terrible anti-Semite. He was also a populist. So it runs the gamut across the political spectrum. And a little bit of populism is a really good thing because the elites are usually out of touch. The bureaucrats no longer are like serving the interests of the problem they were sort of there to solve in the first place. And that, I think, is the good side of it. So, like, that executive order on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, that was terrific. I think that was a populist move, and it was a good thing. Populism is really, really bad when it embraces conspiracy theories. Populism is really, really, really bad when it basically, like, something as complex as the U.S. government or the U.S. economy requires people who are experts, and no one person can know all of that. So there's a tendency among populists to distrust institutions, to distrust experts. If you do that too much, you end up making terrible policy decisions. So I say the analogy I use in the episode is, in this sense, it's a little bit like poison. The toxicity is determined by the dose. So if you have too much of it, it can be a really bad thing. But a little bit is like medicine. It's like a little bit is a good way to kind of kick the asses of the, desiccated, corrupted elites, which have really grown out of touch. So we'll have to see what Trump does. I say he's got a second administration in front of him. But, in the case of Andrew Jackson, there were some moments that were really scary. And one of the worst things that he did, and this is in some ways a parallel to Trump, is that when the Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was exempt from the state of Georgia's laws, they wanted to basically remove them from their land, Jackson ignored the Supreme Court. And that was a constitutional crisis, probably the biggest crisis in the history at that moment of the young republic. That was really bad. And eventually he was shamed into putting out a proclamation that acknowledged the Supreme Court as the final word on interpreting the Constitution. But there's a really tenuous period there. And you can see a parallel when Trump, I think it's fine to go to the courts to say this election wasn't on the up and up. You should look at this. But once the courts decided, and the Supreme Court ruled in a couple of these, you have to accept the judgment. That's the final word. And he never did. Mm-hmm. So as you can see, a kind of parallel there that sometimes populist leaders believe that because they're representing a kind of popular rage, that they are not restrained by these constitutional limits that we expect all presidents to adhere to. So that's a danger. But again, the good news is that, like, I think it would have been very bad to have 4 more years of, like, Kamala Harris and the DEI stuff and all this. It's like, it was just like so, I just felt like that was decline, and like we maybe have a chance to get out of it. So that was bad.
Agree. I agree. Yeah. And, the entire Democratic Party And I'll never identify as a Democrat or a Republican.
Yeah.
I will never. But I think in regards to the Democratic Party, if, they're doing some real soul searching, they need to look at, like I equate it to sports. It's like, why did we lose? We lost because we're not playing good defense. We lost because of turnovers. We lost because we're running the ball too many times on third down. It's like, you have to do some soul searching and self-evaluation. And I think, people like AOC, who's out there fucking just banging her fucking head against the cement, doing the same old bullshit. You're not doing anything good for your party. You think you are. But you need to make changes. I believe in changes. I believe in pivots. I believe in self-evaluation. I believe in growth. I believe in moving, ebbing, flowing. I believe, I look at ourselves like trees. It's like you're a tree. Your roots are planted in the ground, and you're going to grow a branch here, and you might think that's the greatest branch in the world, and then you might think this is a piece of shit. You leave it alone. You let it rot and fall off. It's like you have to ebb, flow, and evolve, not just in life, but certainly in politics. Tell me about the free press, because one of my people that is really influenced me is Barry Weiss, because at first I thought Barry Weiss was this, when I first was hearing her story and I was uninformed about her, I was like, oh, she's this, crazy right wing and, da-da-da-da-da. And then I started listening to her and hearing her story, and I was like, and she's one of the people, when I look back, that sort of influenced me, her and her wife, Nellie Bowles, that influenced me, to sort of go, wait a second. This is not a giraffe. You're telling me this is a giraffe, but I'm seeing a little puppy. or you're telling me the sky is green, but I know it's not green. And just sort of questioning things. So just tell me about this sort of what it's like working for the free press now, when it's become almost a mainstream brand. I don't think it's fully mainstream, and I don't think it'll ever be fully mainstream, but I think it's, become like a really powerful, important brand of news and media.
Well, I agree. We've been growing like a rocket ship. It's incredible. I've known Barry for more than 20 years now, and I knew her when she was at Columbia making the case against, that first generation of Columbia students were like, wait a second, why is the faculty so crazy anti-Israel? And she was a great leader in that. And she is a brilliant journalist and a really great editor, one of the best editors I've ever worked with. And Nellie is just a delight. She's a wonderful person. And the interesting thing is that Barry and Nellie, a lesbian couple, right, who, are pretty, they were like the liberals of 2003. You know what I mean? Like that would have been like the normie liberal, and it tells us something about where the left has gone, that they are now pariahs in a certain group. Although many people, I see that order of the people who tormented her in the New York Times Slack, that world is crumbling before our eyes. But I would say that the free press is trying in some ways to be like we're trying to kind of restore in some ways what the media used to be, which is a place you could trust, that had diversity of opinion, that was lively, and we take ourselves seriously when it comes to getting the news and, pursuing the truth, but we are not going to take ourselves seriously in the way like a New York Times columnist feels like you're reading somebody like, dictating from Mount Olympus or something. And so in some ways, I think the free press is, that was a great way to describe it. We're not the mainstream, but we are like for all the people who have been alienated by the mainstream, we hopefully want to be like kind of their paper of record, or their magazine where they can read and think through, the opinions of the day. And in that respect, I think we're succeeding, beyond, our wildest dreams in some ways. We are expanding. It seems like every other week we're hiring incredible new talent, and it's just really exciting to be a part of it. It's great to do it, and Barry is a kind of the perfect person. She reminds me. I had the great privilege, almost 20 years ago now, to work at the Daily Beast when that was getting started, and that was Tina Brown's project. And Tina Brown's a legendary editor in the business, and Barry really reminds me in some ways of like Tina Brown in her prime. So in that respect, I think it's going nothing but blue skies ahead. It's going to be, it's really terrific. Thank you for asking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by it. And, it's funny, I've never met her. We've communicated.
Oh, I got to set that up, Mike Rap.
Yeah.
I'm on that. Let me make sure that we do that. Okay. That's good.
She's been a big influence to me, her point of view and so much of the free press and the podcasts and the stories and the reading. It really has been an influence to me and put the battery in my back and the information.
I Am Rapaport Podcast.
In regards to Trump, in regards to the Middle East, because you have always broken down the Middle East regarding Trump. I mean, I know you're not going to say you're an expert, but is that your thing that
I like? Okay, so I always say as a journalist, I have the luxury of not being an expert. So I always try to
So what the fuck am I talking to you for, man?
No.
But
what
I mean is, for years. What
I mean
the fuck kind of rules have you been doing?
The experts usually talk to themselves and they get sucked into, you know what I'm saying?
I got you.
My job in some ways is I've been writing about the Middle East for, 25 years now. So, I mean, I know a lot about it, but I always try to kind of remind myself what I don't know. And
I understand. I'm just fucking with you.
Yeah, I know. But so I try to be humble about it. But I would say that when it comes to Trump in the Middle East, I'm worried at this point.
Wow, we just got it. We just started.
Yeah, I'm worried because I went into it.
Break it down.
So the most important thing in the Middle East right now is that the Israelis have proven that the Iranians are really vulnerable in this moment, and that window is going to go away at some point. So two things for the listeners to understand. One, the Iranian, they called it the axis of resistance. I call it the axis of scumbags. You can call it whatever you want, but they had a network of these proxy terrorist groups like Hezbollah, like the Syrian state under Bashar al-Assad. The Houthis are another one. Hamas is another one. And what that allowed them to do was, it was like, all right, if you're going to go and try to take a shot at our nuclear program, then we're going to use our proxies to rain so many missiles that the Iron Dome is not going to be able to intercept all of them, and they're going to land in places like Tel Aviv. And we saw a little bit of that a few months ago, if you remember. Hezbollah had a lot of them. Israel wiped out the Hezbollah missile stocks, took out their leadership, Godfather 1 finale style, and took care of that threat. They took care of the senior leadership of Hamas. There was a regime change, I think, because of the Israeli pressure, but ultimately because Turks came in with these sort of jihadist adjacent rebels, and Bashar al-Assad now hightailed it out to Moscow. Then they took out the air defense systems in Iran. So they're left naked and vulnerable at this point, the Iranians. So I say, in the words of the immortal Steve Winwood, when you see a chance, take it. Because right now you've got a window to take out those nuclear weapons, and that changes the balance of power in the Middle East. The reason I'm concerned is that Trump is now talking about trying to do a deal before that happens with the Iranians. And unless that deal is like, okay, fine, they're going to surrender them themselves, then I don't see the point of that, because I think the Iranians are going to cheat their way out of it. And the guy he's put in charge, this Steve Witkoff guy, who has now got the portfolio to do the deal with Iran, at the very least, it's going to buy him time. I mean, I don't know if the Iranians are capable of coming to a deal with the United States or anybody for that matter. But more importantly, this is the guy who just signed off on this terrible deal for the hostages, which is, they come out in phases. Israelis are giving up a ton of future hostage takers and terrorists. I mean, this is reminiscent of the deal to get Gilad Shalit. Yahya Sinwar, who gave us October 7th, he was part of that return of terrorists to the Palestinians. And then, would it allow Hamas to reconstitute as the sovereign of Gaza? Are you kidding me? But that seems to be the situation at this point. So I'm very, very concerned, Mike Rapp. Now, is it possible?
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
So, maybe finish what you were going to say.
What I'm saying is, if Steve Witkoff is going to be the deal maker in the region, and he's going to now try to pursue an Iran deal instead of having consultations with Netanyahu and the Israeli government to try to figure out, okay, how do we make sure that we take out what's left of, the entire nuclear program from Iran? Now's the time to do that. And that opportunity is not necessarily going to exist. I don't know how long they'll have that option. But right now they do. And, Trump needs to understand that's the play. And by the way, this is why I was somewhat optimistic. The Iranians tried to kill Trump. So they tried to kill Trump. So he's going to sit down and make a deal with them. That, to me, it looks weak, sends the wrong message to our allies, sends the wrong message to our adversaries. So
that's real. What you just said is fucking real. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's like fucking deal's over. If you take a shot at the king and you miss, expect hellfire to come down on you. And this does not have to be like America on the hook to rebuild another country. I understand that he doesn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. It just take out the nukes, and like at that point, I think once you expose them in that respect, they don't have the nuclear blackmail card, then I think the Iranian people hate this regime enough that what we're going to see is hopefully a democratic revolution. I mean, I would not shed a tear if the aging and sickened Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of that country, is strung up by a lamppost. That is the fate that he deserves, and I would like to see the Iranian people do it. So, that's where I'm at on this. So I don't understand all this nonsense about we're going to put this, real estate guy who's a very close friend of Trump in charge of making deals with these people. I think he's been suckered. I think the Qataris, who are a really bad actor, have this Witkoff guy wrapped around their finger, and I don't think he knows what he doesn't know. I think it's a real problem. I'm very, very worried about it. But that said, the good news is that Trump turns on a dime. He is mercurial, and it could just be that he puts up with this bullshit for a little bit and then says, okay, we're going to go in a different direction. But I'm really worried about all the signs at this point.
So you're thinking that Iran is vulnerable, and again, Iran is vulnerable because Israel, the gorgeous, incredible Israel IDF and the airstrikes a few months ago, and they went in there and they fucked the place up.
Yep.
And there were some females that were doing it too, which just makes me so happy.
I felt like Purim came early.
It was unbelievable. The Israeli Air Force, they were in there flying around. They took out so much of their defense stuff. They're vulnerable. So you're saying right now that you wish that we went in there and pounded more or make them submit. Like, what would be ideal for you right now?
Ideally, right now, what you would do is nobody knows outside of, the Israeli, the IDF and the Mossad and the Pentagon and, whatever. But there's some stuff Israel can do against the nuclear program, and there's other stuff they're going to need either special equipment or support from the United States. Work that shit out. You know what I mean? Coordinate that and basically start taking out their nuclear sites. And if they want to make a deal where okay, fine, we submit, we're not going to have a nuclear program, and we're actually going to dismantle our nuclear program once you've introduced the option of we'll dismantle it for you, you fucks. At that point, fine, if you know what I mean. But that's the deal. The deal is either dismantle it and verify that you have dismantled it, or we'll dismantle it for you. There's nothing else to talk about. I don't want, the joint comprehensive plan of agreement with the P5+1. Nobody cares. That's the Obama way. It didn't work. It wasn't going to work. Trump was smart enough to get out of that bad deal. And if he thinks that he's going to get a good deal by starting with all right, what do you need? And we're going to trade. No, the deal has to be, do what we say on this. You should never have had this nuclear program to begin with. You're one of the leading exporters of oil as it is. Either do what we say or we'll do it for you. And that's the negotiation. It's that's right. It. And once you get them in a negotiated process and once you do all this other stuff, at that point, the Iranians are so good at negotiations, and I don't trust this. This Witkoff is a novice when it comes to the Middle East. Now, you could say, all right, Jared Kushner was a novice and he did the Abraham Accords.
Junkyard is the guy. I was so wrong about Junkyard.
No,
Junkyard was that guy.
Yeah, but then, the rumor from Mar-a-Lago at this moment, Mike Rapp, is that the Jared wing, the Jared Ivanka people are on the outs, and it's the Tucker Don Jr. wing that's making the staffing decisions at the people below the principal. So below the Secretary of Defense, you have all these other positions at the Pentagon, and they're going to I don't know, people who are at the these think tanks that are like just down on Israel, down on American power, and it's not good. And so some of that's happening as well. So those are bad signs. That's what's on my mind. But I might come back in 3 weeks, right? And we have this conversation.
Right. It might not even be 3 weeks. It could be next week.
It could be next week.
Moving
And like
so fast.
Right. Trump world changes on a dime, right? So we don't know. Like Rubio, really strong on this stuff. But Pete Hegseth, whatever you want to say about Pete Hegseth not having experience managing a large organization, which is true, like he's a warrior and he knows the Iranians are our enemies. I don't have any doubt about that. The National Security Advisor, this guy Mike Walls, he's terrific on this stuff. I've talked to him on these things before. So, like, you know, that's good. The bad stuff is like the people under them in some cases. And then also, the thing that I'm very worried about is this Witkoff guy. It's no good.
Yeah, I am too. And other people that I consider experts like yourself have said the same thing.
I Am Rapaport Podcast.
The hostage deal is so frustrating. The release of the 3 hostages last week was incredible. Hopefully, by the time this airs, this podcast is out, we'll get 4 more back. But this is not a good deal, and
horrible deal.
And you know what, Eli? I personally think that after October 7th, there was never going to be a good deal. Once we took that blow of all those civilians being killed, even if there was no hostages, but just October 7th alone on the amount of people that were killed, there was no good deal. It's a loss. And we could try to articulate this and try to articulate all these other things. Obviously, there's been wins, but you don't just bounce back from having your country infiltrated on October 7th and having, at the start, 251 hostages taken. We're almost at 1,000 IDF soldiers we've lost. All the PTSD of October 7th, you know, the survivors of October 7th, the children of everyday civilians, cafe owners in Tel Aviv who are running into shelters for the last year, the communities in the north of Israel, the communities in the south of Israel. It's just been nonstop, and violence. And of course, the most pressing, important, heartbreaking, frustrating thing, these hostages. I'm so confused and frustrated just by the fact that they're saying these 33 hostages.
I know.
There's 91 hostages currently. I believe it's 91.
And we don't know how many are dead. I mean, we think we know, but we don't know. A lot of them could be and they're going to give back the corpses. You know what? I'm sorry. I understand. We want to get as many of these people out as possible. And it's a real dilemma because if you get too close, they'll do what they did before, and they'll shoot them in the head because they're sick fucks.
They're sick fucking animals.
Yeah, they're horrible and it's terrible. But the one thing I would say, and we shouldn't lose sight of it, is that because of the horror of October 7th, I'm never going to put you're right about everything you said, but that set off a chain of events where Hezbollah is a shell of itself. Yes. Bashar al-Assad is no longer in charge of Syria. Yes. And the new leadership, as much as I'm concerned about the new leadership, and we should be, because they're a former al-Qaeda, they've said they don't want any smoke with Israel. That's a good thing. And then
they said that. We'll see if they get fucking...
Yeah, but they're not gonna be a pawn of the Iranians. The Iranians are the people who oppressed and starved and murdered, along with the Russians, the Syrian people. So there is a little bit of reason to believe that maybe they don't want to go all the way there. And finally, the Hamas itself is they're certainly performing as if they won the war because
they're nothing.
But they lost everybody at the senior levels, including Sinwar. And their tunnels are destroyed. A lot of them are. So it's like there is some success. It's just like I don't want to get back into a situation where they're still the de facto sovereigns of Gaza. And if that's what this deal ends up looking like, I mean, technically that's, there's some phase where it comes in and maybe other things happen, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I think the structure of the deal makes sure that it won't happen. So if they remain the sovereigns of Gaza, then that's a loss. But if the dynamics of the rest of the region change, starting with Iran's the most important piece, then maybe they can hang on. Because if you have a situation where the Iranians no longer have that nuclear blackmail card, then, and the Iranians are really reeling, and the Iranians are getting all of these sanctions putting back on them, the regime at least, and everything like that, well then, like, at that point, maybe they don't have the money, maybe they don't have the ability, they don't have the logistical networks if they lost Syria, which they did, to arm Hezbollah. How are they going to get this, to the Hamas? Now that one of the things the Israelis learned is that the Egyptian military was smuggling underneath, their border through the Sinai into Gaza. Hopefully the Israelis are kind of on top of that. Maybe that stops. So once if you can cut off Hamas, what's left of them, then maybe they become too weak, and maybe you can get somebody else better in there. But this is like a lifeline, this deal for them, and I hate that.
I know it is a lifeline, and I just, the one thing that no one has given an answer on is how are we just accepting 33 hostages when there's 91 hostages? I don't understand that. Like, so after let's say Saturday they gave those 33. Some are alive, some are dead. There's still 50-something other people in there.
I'll tell you something along those lines. It's really
twisted, man.
Yeah, it is
fucking
twisted.
Way
it's
out there.
Absolutely
and how long
twisted.
are we going to keep doing this shit?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you something else that I'm very worried about. The Kfar Bibis, those twins, those infants they stole, like the animals, the sick animals that they are. Let me tell you something. If they're not in that first group, if we don't see them, then I'm assuming they're dead. They killed those fucking babies. I'm just saying, like, if that's the case, I think the nation of Israel is going to freak out. So, I mean, at a certain point, what you have to do is just, you got to get back to the original goal of the war. No more Hamas. Ending Hamas. And I think you end him. And by the way, taking out the Iranian nukes is a good way to start to get down that road. I mean, and as well as taking out their senior leaders. So I'm with you, Mike Rapp. It's not a good deal.
It's not a good deal.
And it's unfortunate. We're not as close. We as in diaspora don't feel it as intensely as the Israelis. But one of the things maybe we can do in this sort of broader, the broader community of Israel, or the broader Jewish nation, as it were, is that we can maybe, because we're distant from it, have a little bit of perspective and say, as horrible as it is if we don't get some of these hostages back, and that is a terrible thing, and we want them back, and I know how much you've advocated for it, and you've put your own voice behind it, and that's important. As much as we want those hostages back, that's not the ball game. The ball game is ending Hamas so we don't have future hostages.
I agree.
It's bad.
One of the podcasts that you had put out a few months ago that I loved, the As a Jew.
Oh yeah, that was one of my last ones for Nebula. So that was a good one.
Just inform people about that, because the As a Jew, I had never heard that term, and I don't know if you created it, but you did a whole episode before you just started launching your new podcast, Breaking History. But explain what an As a Jew is, and give the prototype poster boys of As a Jews.
The As a Jew are the Jews that basically side against Israel. And they always start their statement, as a Jew, I can't abide by the bombing and so forth, So it's one of those things. And I looked at the historical precedent for this. And historically, there have always been Jews, like in the Middle Ages, before we had a state of Israel, that would try to ingratiate themselves with the powers that be by converting and claiming, well, as a Jew, I have this knowledge of that the Talmud is actually, blasphemy, and we should burn the Talmud. And there was a guy by the name of Johannes Pfefferkorn who in the early 16th century did this in Germany, and it was potentially a terrible thing. But the silver lining, again, like the history is a funny thing, is that he thought he had an ally in one of the leading Christian Catholic theologians at the time, a guy named Johannes Reuchlin. And Reuchlin looked at his argument basically and said, you are a total fraud, and ended up defending him and persuaded the emperor at the time to reverse what was known as the Padua Mandate, which was, to confiscate all the Talmuds. And he reversed it. He persuaded him using the logic of kind of Christian theology. And Reuchlin is a great hero, one of the original righteous Gentiles. And history always has this. It's another side of the story, is that don't paint with too broad of a brush. There were terrible things that happened to our people in, the Islamic world, in Christian Europe, but there were also individuals who understood that we were people of the same book in some ways that they were, and that, the Judaism is like the sort of the base of, Christianity, and you could also argue Islam. And in that respect, so I just think it's always a kind of complicated question, that there are always going to be Jews who side with the enemies of the Jews, but there are also Gentiles who will side with the Jews and really make a difference. And in today's context, I would say Richie Torres, John Fetterman, these are people who I would say are the, sort of in that great tradition of Johannes Reuchlin, who have taken a stand in their own Democratic Party against this kind of anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism. And, we should, I'm so grateful for Richie Torres and John Fetterman. And I think we're hopefully going to see more, because I think part of the reason why the Democrats did so badly is because they were associated, they didn't want to offend the lunatics on college campuses.
Fuck those scumbags on college campuses.
Exactly, right.
Fuck those coward, fucking faceless, costume wearing,
cosplayers,
cocksuckers. Fuck them. They're cosplayers, and they're fucking. They're like Palestinian blackface. You might as well put on blackface. You're not a fucking. You're not in a mosque. You might as well say you're part of the Bloods and Crips. You're not in the fucking gang.
Yeah.
You're not a terrorist. Take the fucking mask off. Take the fucking outfit off. You look fucking ridiculous.
Totally.
You look fucking ridiculous. Another thing, your podcast, you told me, isn't just historical stuff. You told me that you're working on an episode, and could you just give a little insight into the Los Angeles fires and California as a whole?
Well, we're going to lead with California, and then we're going to get into, we want to answer this question. Because I think the wildfires, we could do something on like the ecology of Southern California, but lots of people have done that. What we're looking at is, what does it tell us about the state failure of the mono party, the Democrats in California? And to answer that question, we do go back in history. We go back 50 years. I don't want to give too much away because I'm still writing it, but we go back 50 years to San Francisco, and we look at what I call San Fran 70s, which is a wild time. But San Fran 70s, that's where we see the modern kind of, not just California, really national, sort of approach to democratic politics, which is this coalition of progressive identity groups. So you've got, what's the Democratic Party? The Democratic Party used to be like labor. It was like labor, trial lawyers, this, that, and the other. Now it's, LGBTQ, that's one camp. Black Lives Matter, that's another camp. Latino, it's every identity, women, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pushing for women's rights. That's not the point. The point is that it's all identity-based politics. And
all of it.
All of it. And if you really want to know the proof of concept where that kind of coalition finally kind of gains power and has success, it's the San Francisco mayoral election of 1975, which is a fascinating story that really gets into, first of all, it's a great story because San Francisco in the 70s is a wild place. Mm-hmm. And second of all, it kind of helps explain what the Democratic Party in California is today. Because San Francisco really is the power in that state. More so, you lived there for many years. LA is a huge city. It's a big deal. Hollywood is a big deal. That's important. But if you want to understand the history of where the real power brokers in the state are, it's the Bay Area, it's the state. And to me, it's a great story.
All right. Well, I can't wait to hear that. And obviously right now, more than ever, California, the good, bad, the ugly, and the post horrible fires is very pressing. So I hope you get that one out soon. I can't wait to have you as a platform. I respect you so much. I've learned so much from you. You've given me so much insight for breaking history, which I'm assuming we could find on all podcast platforms.
It's real easy. Breaking history. I think we're number 10 in the podcast. I mean, I don't know how those. Let's go. And thank you, Mike Rapaport. It is such an honor to be your friend. And I really appreciate you giving me this platform today to tell your listeners.
Man. Come on.
Breaking history. I have to tell you one thing before I go. My senior producer and collaborator, a guy who's in London named Alex Miller, who works with me on these episodes and the scripts and everything, I told him I was going on the show, and he says, just tell Mike Rapp that he was amazing in True Romance. He made that movie.
Yeah. Let's go. Well, I didn't make it. That was definitely a team effort.
It was a team effort, but you were so good as a contrast to the Christian Slater character who comes out of nowhere. It was so good. Anyway, you were amazing, man. It was
Tell
awesome.
him I said you're so cool, because if he's a real True Romance person,
he gets it. You're so cool.
He'll know what that means. All right, breaking history. Eli Lake. Follow him. Support him. I can't wait to hear the episodes. I listen to all your episodes.
Thank you.
I call you. We talk. We FaceTime. We talk our shit. Breaking history. The Free Press. Eli Lake. Good luck with it. And make sure, Eli, make sure. I always tell people that are starting a new podcast, you could have the greatest content in the world, but if you're not pressing record and saving those fucking files, none of it matters. So make sure you
Yeah, it's
because
true.
God forbid you record one of your episodes and you have to re-record it because it didn't get saved. It's happened to me a handful of times, and it is a brutal feeling. So the number one rule of podcasts, I got 1 through 5, is make sure you're pressing record and save on those podcast
Absolutely.
episodes.
Okay. Thanks,
right.
Mike Rapp. All right.
I'll talk to you soon, my
friend. You too, my friend. Okay. Bye-bye.